Ruth Martinez wiped the marble banister for the third time that morning, her weathered hands moving in practice circles. The Harrison mansion stood silent except for the distant sound of 8-year-old Ethan's laughter echoing from upstairs. She smiled, remembering how he'd asked her to make extra pancakes because they taste like happiness. The boy was the only light in this cold house of money and marble. A sudden thud shattered the silence. Ruth's cloth froze mid-motion. "Ethan," she called, her voice bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. No answer. Her heart began racing as she climbed the grand staircase, her worn shoes silent on the plush carpet. She found him crumpled at the top landing, his small body motionless beside his favorite red toy car. "Oh God, no." Ruth dropped to her knees, gathering the limp child in her arms. His face was pale as winter snow, his breathing shallow and labored. His lips held a faint blue tinge that made her stomach drop. She pressed her ear to his chest. His heartbeat was erratic, like a broken drum. "Help! Someone help!" she screamed, carrying him toward the kitchen where the butler stood frozen in shock. The other staff members whispered nervously in the corner, their eyes wide with fear. "Call an ambulance," Ruth demanded, but they hesitated, glancing at each other with uncertainty. "Miss Ruth, we can't just dash," the butler stammered. "He's dying," she roared, her voice cracking with desperation. But still they hesitated. They all knew Mr. Harrison's strict rules about emergencies, about maintaining order, about never acting without his permission. Ruth looked down at Ethan's face, growing paler by the second. His breathing was becoming more labored, each breath a struggle. Time was running out, and she realized with growing horror that no one in this mansion full of servants would act to save this precious child's life. Ruth's decision crystallized in an instant of pure maternal instinct. She tightened her grip on Ethan's small body and ran toward the front entrance, her apron flying behind her. The household staff called after her, their voices filled with panic and warning, but she didn't look back. The massive oak doors burst open as she charged through them, startling the security guard stationed outside. "Stop right there," barked the head guard, a burly man named Stevens. "You cannot remove the master's son from the property without authorization." "Then watch him die," Ruth screamed back, tears streaming down her face. She could feel Ethan's body growing heavier, more lifeless in her arms. His head lolled back, exposing his neck where she could see his pulse, fluttering weakly. Stevens stepped forward, his hand reaching for his radio, but something in Ruth's eyes made him pause. The raw terror, the fierce determination, the love that blazed there like a flame. Behind him, the other guard shifted uncomfortably, torn between duty and humanity. "If this boy dies because you followed rules instead of your heart, how will you sleep tonight?" Ruth's voice was hoarse but cutting. "How will any of you sleep?" The guards exchanged glances. Stevens lowered his radio slowly. "Go," he whispered, stepping aside. Ruth sprinted down the long driveway, her lungs burning with each breath. Cars passed by on the street, their drivers glancing curiously at the disheveled woman running barefoot with a child in her arms. She waved frantically, pleading with her eyes, but car after car sped past. Finally, a young man in a dented blue sedan screeched to a halt. "Get in," he shouted, throwing open the passenger door. Ruth dove inside, cradling Ethan protectively as the car accelerated toward the city hospital. Every second felt like an eternity as she whispered prayers and promises to the unconscious boy in her arms. The hospital emergency entrance loomed ahead like a beacon of hope. Ruth didn't wait for the car to fully stop before throwing herself out, still clutching Ethan against her chest. The automatic doors sensed her approach and slid open with a mechanical whisper. "Help! Please help!" she cried, her voice echoing through the sterile hallway. Several nurses looked up from their stations, their training immediately kicking in as they assessed the situation. One nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, rushed forward with a wheelchair. "What happened?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. "He collapsed. He can't breathe properly. His lips are turning blue." Ruth's words tumbled out in a frantic stream. Her arms ached from carrying Ethan, but she couldn't bear to let him go. "Ma'am, we need to get him on a stretcher," a young doctor said, appearing beside them with practiced efficiency. "You've done everything you could. Now let us help him." Ruth's grip tightened instinctively. This child had been her responsibility for 3 years. She'd bandaged his scraped knees, comforted him through nightmares, celebrated his small victories. The thought of releasing him felt like tearing away a piece of her soul. "I promise we'll take good care of him," the doctor said gently, understanding her reluctance. "But every second counts now." With trembling hands, Ruth finally laid Ethan on the stretcher. His small sneakers dangled over the edge, one barely hanging on. She reached out to fix it, an automatic gesture of care, before the medical team wheeled him away toward the emergency room. The door swung shut with a final, echoing clang. Ruth stood alone in the hallway, her arms empty, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done everything she could. Now all she could do was pray that it had been enough, that her desperate gamble would save the boy she loved like her own son. The sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against linoleum announced his arrival before Ruth even turned around. Marcus Harrison stormed into the hospital corridor like a force of nature, his perfectly tailored suit and silver hair commanding attention from every nurse and visitor in sight. "What the hell have you done?" His voice cut through the hospital's quiet hum like a blade. Ruth turned to face him, her tear-stained cheeks and disheveled appearance a stark contrast to his polished exterior. "How dare you take my son without permission?" "Your son was dying," Ruth replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "He collapsed in your house, and not one person would help him because they were too afraid of you." Harrison's face flushed red with indignation. "You had no right. You're just a maid. You don't make decisions about my child." His voice rose, drawing stares from other families in the waiting area. "While you sat in your office, counting money and making deals, your boy couldn't breathe." Ruth shot back, her own anger finally surfacing. "He's been telling you for months that his chest hurt, that he felt tired, but you never listened. You were too important, too busy. Don't you dare lecture me about my son." Harrison stepped closer, his eyes blazing with fury and something else, fear. "If something happens to him because of your reckless actions, if something happens to him, it's because his father never paid attention." Ruth interrupted, her voice breaking with emotion. "That little boy worships you. He just wanted his daddy to notice when he wasn't feeling well." The words hit Harrison like physical blows. His confident stance wavered slightly, doubt creeping into his eyes. Around them, the hospital continued its quiet rhythm of healing and hope. But in this corner of the corridor, 2 people faced the devastating truth about what mattered most when a child's life hung in the balance. Dr. Sarah Chun emerged from the emergency room, her surgical mask hanging loosely around her neck, her expression serious but hopeful. Both Ruth and Harrison shot to their feet, their earlier argument forgotten in the face of desperate need for news. "Mr. Harrison?" Dr. Chun addressed the millionaire directly. "Your son has a congenital heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot. It's been putting enormous strain on his cardiovascular system. Without immediate intervention tonight, he wouldn't have survived." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the plastic waiting room chair, his face draining of all color. The invincible businessman who commanded boardrooms and controlled millions crumbled completely. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Chin continued. "But I need you to understand, this woman saved your son's life. Another hour, maybe less, and it would have been too late." Harrison looked up at Ruth through tear-filled eyes, seeing her clearly for the first time in 3 years, not just as hired help, but as the woman who had loved his child when he had been too proud and distracted to notice his son's suffering. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. "God, Ruth, I'm so sorry. You were right about everything." Ruth knelt beside his chair, her own tears flowing freely. "He's going to be okay, Mr. Harrison. That's all that matters now." "Can we see him?" Harrison asked Dr. Chun, his voice barely audible. In the recovery room, Ethan lay small and fragile against white sheets, but his color was already better. When he saw them both together, his face lit up with a weak smile. "Daddy?" "Ruth," he whispered. Harrison took his son's tiny hand, pressing it against his cheek as tears streamed down his face. "I'm here, son. I'm finally here, and I promise I'll never stop listening to you again." Roof stood at the foot of the bed, watching his father and son reconnected. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to discover what truly matters most.